What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Coach to Coach podcast. Today is going to be a solo Q&A, so it's just me, solo dolo today, answering some questions from my Instagram page. Before we get rolling, subscribe, like, comment. Any bit of engagement helps the channel to grow. Even if you just drop like a stupid fire emoji, much appreciated. Getting right into it. Alex Guns asks, best piece of advice you've ever received. There are two pieces of advice that I received that have always stuck with me. The first one is from my dad. At this point in time, I was basically burnout personal training. I was working a lot, working at two different training jobs. I would leave the house at like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't get home until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And it was just that on repeat 6 days per week. I was burnt out. I think he saw that I was feeling pretty low and tired, and I told him that. And what he told me was, it's okay to be tired, you just can't give up. And it really resonated with me. Something that's so simple. It's okay to be tired. It's okay to feel this way, but you got to keep going. And it's always stuck with me. The way that I use that, it's okay to feel these sort of negative emotions and embrace them, but ultimately you can't let them rule you. You can't make impulsive decisions because of them. You have to keep going, right? Because any impulsive decision that you make while you are in a highly emotional state, odds are it's not going to be a great decision. The next piece of advice that I got was when I first started personal training, I wasn't even yet certified. I got a personal training job, and the owner of the gym, he knew that I wasn't certified, and he was fine with that. Fun little tidbit, like, you don't actually have to be certified to be a personal trainer. Like, there's no law. At least at that point in time, there wasn't. I think it's mostly just like an insurance thing, but this was a small independent gym. It wasn't a big box gym. And so I wasn't certified. I didn't have any fucking experience, and self-doubt, right? Imposter syndrome. I voiced that to the owner of the gym. I said, hey, what do I say if my clients ask me, how long have I been training? You know what I mean? How long have I been doing this? And, what do I say to them, right? Because I've got no experience, and I was nervous about that. I was nervous about being found out, that I was super green. What he told me was, fake it until you make it. It was very impactful for me because this is coming from the owner of the gym, right? This is coming from my boss. And he said, look, man, just fake it until you make it. There's a lot of truth behind that. I think that saying can be not useful in some ways, but very useful in other ways. Sometimes the delivery of how you say a thing can make all the difference in the world, or the way that you portray yourself can make all the difference in the world, not only to how people receive you, but how you view yourself and the confidence that you exude. You were to ask me, what color is the sky? And I were to say, yeah, the sky is blue. The sky is blue. Versus me saying the sky is purple and it's a beautiful purple sky day. The sky is not purple, right? The way that you say a thing, the way that you portray yourself, it's going to massively impact the way that people receive you. Just being confident, even if you're faking it, that also can give you some momentum to not doubt yourself every single second, to get into situations and tell yourself, even if you're gaslighting yourself, like, I can do this, I know what I'm doing, even if it's in the back of your head it's saying I don't. Get into it and figure it out along the way, accumulate the experience, improve on your process. All right, T. Anderson 3793 asks, is it worth the exposure to do a TRT and Primo at a 1-to-1 ratio for a weight cut? All labs are currently healthy. Is it worth it? Depends on your own personal goals, your own personal risk tolerance, what you're willing to get out of that. So let's break that down, right? So TRT, what is TRT? TRT is testosterone replacement therapy. If we're talking about true TRT, maybe that falls somewhere between 100 and 200 milligrams of testosterone a week. And so if we're talking about a 1-to-1 ratio, we're talking about 100 to 200 milligrams of Primobol in a week. With that, in terms of exposure, like that's we're looking at max 400 milligrams a week. Lab markers are healthy. So on something like that, you're really not going to see a whole bunch of skewing on your lab panel, on your blood work. You really shouldn't, at least. But obviously, if your baseline is 200 milligrams of testosterone and you double that milligram amount, you're going to have a response. You're going to get a response from that. The nature of primobolan is that for some people, it can act as a means of controlling estrogen, right? It can act as a hardener, and I hate throwing those terms out, but it can lend to a, leaner, harder appearance. And in a caloric deficit and a fat loss context, yeah, it can add a nice little icing on the cake, but I don't think it's the cake itself. You could have a great weight cut, fat loss cut, doing just testosterone. Is it going to be this night and day difference that you notice because you added in 200 milligrams of primobolan? Probably not. Is it going to get you maybe a little bit more of a cosmetic improvement? Probably, but nothing that is going to be crazy, not in my opinion. Something like that, I think that's really reasonable, very conservative. I don't see any issue with doing something like that if that lines up to your own personal goals and what you're trying to do. Coleman B73 asks, do you most commonly program macros, or do you like to write out meal plans? So check it out. This is just what I've seen. I have seen that most clients that I work with that aren't incredibly well-versed with nutrition, that haven't had successful cuts or bulks on their own, that haven't been successful in managing their body composition on their own, they are not going to be as successful with just macros as somebody that is on a dedicated meal plan. What it basically boils down to is that unless you have found success tracking macros on your own, you simply don't have the systems in place to be consistent. At least that's what I've seen. Point blank period. The clients that I have that are on a set meal plan get better results than the clients that I have that are on a macro-based plan. The macro-based plan, and I still break things down per meal. I have totals for the day, so how much total protein for the day, total carbs, total fat for the day, but I also break down per meal what those macros should be, right? To get the totals by the end of the day. That is a system there, right? That in itself is a bit of a system. And if you don't have a system like that in place and you just have a macro target for total for the day, one day you might eat 3 meals, one day you might eat 5 meals, one day you might eat, 2 meals. And in that, you increase the likelihood to be off track by the end of the day. Another layer underneath that is that it's really easy to get caught up in just macros. Fuck your macros. Macros are not the only thing that matter. So macros, they don't dive into the quality of the food. You got a Ferrari, you want to be a Ferrari, right? Well, you're going to have to put high octane fuel into that Ferrari in order for it to perform like a Ferrari. You can't just put regular pump gas in because it's not going to be able to perform the same way. It needs high quality fuel. The fuel itself, right, macros, that's one component of it. But the micronutrients, the quality of that fuel, that also matters. And so when you have somebody that's just looking at macros and doesn't have a good understanding or doesn't have the discipline to consistently eat fruits and vegetables and doesn't have the discipline to consistently eat high quality fat sources, your avocado, your olive oil, your whole eggs, your walnuts, right? Your almonds, things of that nature. And they're just getting their fat sources in from whatever animal sources or processed foods because it fits the macros. You're going to have two different outcomes, and it's not going to show up immediately, and it may not show up in your body composition, but it will show up in your overall health and longevity. To wrap that up, I prefer to do a meal plan because I see better outcomes with it. Once I have a client that has run on a meal plan for a while and they understand and they've adopted the systems that I put into place for them, then we can start moving away from that and giving them some freedom and autonomy because they've developed the habits and skill sets in order to be able to consistently nail a well-rounded, high-quality diet. Steve Gabriel, NPTIDNS, writes, glycolysis, hypertrophy, or every set to failure. So I guess I need to know more context here. I would need to know what is the goal. If we assume that the goal is to be a larger, leaner, more muscular human being, like what's the number one thing for building muscle? Like what needs to happen in training to build muscle. There needs to be a high amount of mechanical tension combined with a close proximity to failure in order to create that hypertrophy response. That's it. We can keep it as simple as that. I think that the further that you get away from that, or the more complex that you try to make that, the further away from the goal you get. And maybe if this question was phrased a little bit differently, I could add, more insight, but that's just how I would look at that. Because you've got glycolysis. I mean, we could look at that as almost like metabolic training, and it feels nice to get a good pump. I don't think the pump is invaluable. Like, I'm a pump chaser 100%. But if you're talking about just purely driving metabolic work, you're getting a lot of metabolic byproduct and buildup, you're getting a great pump, but none of those sets are to a close proximity to failure, I think you're missing the target. Alex Guns writes in again, ever heard of high-dose tren causing hypersexuality and making dudes gay? I'm assuming that this is, More Plates, More Dates puts out some kind of Reddit stories like this, and I've not directly known or heard of anybody becoming gay because they use tren, but I can speak to my own experience here. Not about turning gay, but about hypersexuality on tren. And it's a real thing. And I've used tren at dosages across the board. I've gone as low as 70 milligrams a week all the way up to 700 milligrams per week. At 700 milligrams per week, there is for me, a very noticeable, dramatic increase to my sex drive, to where I'm just thinking about it. I'm thinking about it a whole lot. It is an issue. It just becomes a problem, basically. At least it did for me. Not a problem in the sense that I'm out there just being a man whore or anything like that. Nothing like that. Like, I still control myself, of course, but invasive thoughts, just put it that way. But yeah, I think it's a thing. I could see, somebody that maybe is not as in control of their emotion and their thoughts and can't combat these invasive thoughts. Maybe they start acting on some of these emotions and tendencies that are building up, and they start doing not cool stuff. All right, what else do we got? Coleman B73 writes in again, what factors do you consider when working with a client? So look, I pretty much will work with anybody, but at this point in time, I have been able to identify red flags off the jump. A lot of the red flags that I encounter, they can be mitigated by simply managing expectations off of the jump. Some people just don't have realistic expectations. They might send me a picture of this is what I want to look like. And I'm like, hey man, this is years down the road. Like, you're talking about a level of development in your physique that is going to take years, not months, to achieve. Somebody that maybe has had issues with binging or restricting or any of that sort of thing, I will just straight off the jump be like, I'm not qualified to, address those sort of issues. So I'm willing to work with you, but if it gets to the point where you're telling me you're binging, purging, or any of those sort of issues, that's above my head. And you need to go work with somebody that is qualified to work with you in that regard. But I will say that I have worked with people in that have those issues and been successful in it. But I just have to be really particular and just make sure that I stay in my wheelhouse and don't speak on things or give advice on things that aren't in my wheelhouse. All right, last one we got. The Papa Goku writes, best exercise to grow a bigger chest. Could get really in the weeds with this, but one thing that I like to kind of always work back to, because you can get paralysis by analysis. You could say, oh, this machine loads in this way, this machine does this movement does this, right? Like, you can really break down all these different movements in different ways. Peel it back to before we had all the fancy machines, before the science was really getting into all this stuff. People were building big chests, right? On dumbbells and barbells, period. Dumbbells, barbells, dumbbell flies, barbell pressing, dumbbell pressing. You can build a big chest on those things. So I think that there is I think you can strip it back to that and say that the basics work. The basics work. And if you are using this movement or executing this movement with a high degree of tension on the target muscle, the pecs, and you're taking these sets consistently to a close proximity to failure, and you're in a caloric surplus, odds are your chest is going to grow. Obviously, it's not as simple as that in the real world. I have a client who we've been focused on growing his chest, and it's a stubborn body part for him. And so tried a bunch of different things to kind of various exercises to match his frame, match his mechanics, and ultimately just gotten down to the point, like strip things back to the point of, if you don't feel your chest contracting, if you don't feel your chest stretching under load, don't care how great the movement is on paper, we're not going to use it. So just getting in tune with the feel, getting in tune with the mind-muscle connection, and using that as a guiding light. I don't care if this on paper is the best exercise. I don't care. If you don't connect with it, we're not going to use it. And so we've stripped a lot of the training back to that, and it's taken some trial and error, and we've landed on a couple different exercises, one of them being floor press, in which he can really feel his chest, and now it's just a matter of eating in the caloric surplus, consistently training with high amount of tension on the target muscle, consistently training that to a close proximity to failure. All right, that'll do it for this solo Q&A. Again, drop me a like, drop me a comment, subscribe, leave questions in the comments if you want them answered. Again, I put up a question box on my Instagram. Make sure you're following me over there, and I will see you for the next one.